I'm not sure why. It may be the length. I've usually kept the lecture down to about an hour in here, and in some of them it's gone like 2 hours. Might be just the length of the video.
The video just gets tired. It's like,
Yeah.
I don't want to work anymore.
So this is the chapter, if any of you have the book, would be chapter 5, table expressions. And these are a little bit, as I said, they're a little bit strange, but they're useful. And a lot of these can be done in other ways. So I'm going to start with derived tables. And I'm going to stop by 11 or so you have an hour to work. Okay. So even if we don't finish it. And I will use, I haven't done this yet, but I'll use Community Assist. Okay. Now the first one, I mean, it's a little bit like a subquery. It's a slightly different. I'm going to do select star from, and then in the from clause, what's different is we've had subqueries in the select clause and we've had them in the where clause. This is putting them in the from clause. Right, so we're going to have the subquery in the from clause, and I'm going to say select. I'm going to alias ahead of time, person key, person last name. I'm going to just break it for, and person first name. I actually don't need the P there. I'll just do person first name. Okay, and I'm going to interjoin. Okay, so this will be from person. And it'll interjoin person address, even though I'm not calling any fields from that. And so I'm p dot person key. Equals pa dot person key. And then we'll say where city equals, and I'll just do Bellevue. And I'm going to alias this as Bellevue residence. Whoops. I don't want an enter there. I keep hitting enter when I want shift. So I'm aliasing the subquery, which is required, weirdly. So the difference between this and anything we've done before is that the subquery is in the from clause. Right, so I'm basically selecting everything from this subquery. And these are the people that were in Bellevue. Now I could do some other things too, like, I mean, I could have included the city if we wanted. We could easily include city, and it would have the same effect. Does that make sense, sort of? It's a little bit weird. And why would you do this? You could do this with a simple join, right? We're doing a join anyway, so why do it in the from clause? It's another way to do things. I'm going to show you a couple variations of this in a moment that might make more sense. But does that make sense to you as a structure at all?
Yeah, structurally, yeah, but it's just kind of like, why make a subquery if you're selecting star from?
Well, you don't have to select star from.
Yeah.
And one of the things you could do, say I wanted to, I could alias a couple of these. So I'm making a couple of things. So let's do person last name. Let's just do it as last. And then I need the comma back. And city, and then this, let's just do this as first. You don't need square brackets, but and then up here I could do select. So if we want person key, I could do person key. Probably, do I need to alias that? I'm not sure if I do. Last in square brackets, that's why I wanted that in square brackets. Comma first. And so I could address it. Notice it works just, I didn't do city still. Actually, I did do city. Oh, but I didn't put it up here. Last, first, city. So I don't know if you gain anything, but I could alias these to different. Now I could still do the similar kind of thing in a join, right? I could do the same thing in a join. But here I can address them directly by their aliases in the outer query. Is that gaining anything much? I don't know, maybe. Yeah, again, it's quite doable in a simple join. So, but does that sort of make sense as a
structurally
as a
makes
structure?
sense.
Yeah.
We're
That'd be
we're not using the as value reference or anything either, right? What, do we need that as value?
You know, it's the derived query that you have to alias the. You're basically creating a temp table
Okay.
with the results.
Oh, so you don't, if you don't have the as, it doesn't work.
Well, let's try it. I think
I
that
just tried it.
it gives you an error. Yeah.
It says syntax error.
I think everything has to be named. Now, one of the places where I will be doing this in a moment is if you have complex equations inside, you have to alias them because you can't have an unnamed column. And you also can't have the table unnamed. Right? I'm going to do another one, which is very similar actually to some of the changes I made here. But I'm going to just do select. I'm going to select request months, which we don't have. Service name, count, service. I'm just going to count the names as, let me bring that up. I think it'll, yeah, as count, which I'm going to put in square brackets because that's a reserved word. Okay, so I'm going to do this from, and this is, then I'll do the subquery again. So I'm going to just do with the parentheses, select month, grant date as request. The as is always optional. It might make sense to put it in there. Service name. And I guess that's the only two I have, right? So, and then from service grant. And then we need to inner join, so that'll be SG. inner join community service. With one word. And I'll do that as CS. On sg.service key. Why am I not getting that? There it is. Equals CS.service key. Okay. I think that's all I need there. And then I'm going to say as service count. So you need to name that. And then I also have to group by outside of this. Group by, and I have to group by request month and service name. So what we're doing is we're asking for the request month is the alias for month grant date. The service name comes from service, right? The community service. We're counting how many requests were made in that month. And then because we're doing an aggregate on the outer equation, or the outer query, we have to group by also on the outer. I don't know if I'm explaining these well. I feel like I'm not. So for each month, in month 8, childcare, there were 9 requests. In month 9, there was 1. Again, our data set isn't very rich. In month 8 for clothes, there were 4 counts. And in month 9, there was 1. A lot of these 9s only have 1. Actually, a lot of dental ones in 9 there. 1 in 8 anyway. It depends on what I was doing when I was entering data. But you could probably achieve, again, the same kind of thing with just a normal inner join. But there's this.
What's the advantage of this?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not entirely sure what the advantage of that is. Can anybody think of an advantage to doing it this way?
Well, I guess like if you were not exactly sure how to manipulate a small amount of data, you can do the subquery first, look at it, and then figure out like what you
Well,
want to count.
yeah, you could. I'm just seeing if the book had. It tells you how to do it. It doesn't say why you would do it. It's another way to set it up. Again, I'm not entirely, so what you're doing is you're creating a temporary table in the from clause. You know, in normal from statements, you are always accessing a table, right? So what we're doing is we are creating a temporary table from which we are doing our selections. The subquery creates a temp table. That table, by the way, probably only exists in the temp DB. It never has any, it never gets written to the database anywhere. It's just a table that you've generated at that moment. I still don't know, doing this, you can tell that I'm not super, these a lot because they get confused. But, you know, they could be useful in certain contexts, I would imagine. Some of the other stuff I'm going to show you will be a lot more useful.
Can you explain the difference between a derived table and a common table expression?
Right, we're going to common table expressions next. They're a little bit different in form.
Okay.
And the book suggests that if you're going to do this kind of query, you should do the common table expression rather than the derived one, but just to show it. So you're doing the assignment as we talk?
These are derived tables.
These are derived tables. As common table expressions. So let's do a couple common table expressions. So I'm going to comment that, common table expressions. So what I'm going to do, common table expressions start with the with word. And then I am going to call the first one, since we called it Bellevue residence, I'm going to just say with Bellevue residence. Now, so what basically called Bellevue residence. Inside of here, I can do, I'm just going to actually go copy my inner equation there. So the part from the, wherever we started with the from, there it is. So I'm going to put that all underneath this. I want it to get a little bit of, now I'm going to break this so you can kind of see the structure with parentheses. The query comes at the end. So this would be like select last, first, so I'm just looking up there, city, from Bellevue expressions, or Bellevue residence. Reading two things at once isn't good. Residence. So this is exactly the same query, and despite the underlines, it works. And it suggests you do this as opposed to the other. And, you know, the table expressions. I think maybe because these have more of a structure, and I'm going to show you a couple of other things you can do here too with these. So we're creating a temp table called Bellevue residence. We're using with. We'll see some of these things as we go on when we start creating objects, because these are like creating little temp objects. And again, I'm not 100% sure what the advantage of doing this is this way, because again, everything could be done with a simple join. Does anybody see an advantage? Somebody's brain might be working better than mine today. So the structure of a common table expression starts with a with, has an as. As is usually where you start defining things, right? So we're saying with Bellevue residence as. So what's in the parentheses here is the definition of what Bellevue residence is. It's a definition of that object. And then we are querying from that object. So I guess the one advantage of this over the previous form, not necessarily over a join, but over a previous form, is that the structure of this is clear.
Right, you define
the object and then you query from
query.
it.
That kind of makes more.
And whereas in the other, you query and then define the object in the from clause. And again, this object has no permanence. It's just for the duration of the transaction, which is milliseconds. Does that make sense at all? You look, I would understand if you were bemused, actually. Let's do another one. With the one above, right?
It just seems like it's like reiterating the same information that you would get from the first.
Well, so they have exactly the same results. This has exactly the same results as this, except I didn't put the person key in there. There's no difference between them except structure, you know, in terms of result. And you could easily create an inner join that has exactly the same results. But this is true of a lot of languages. There are multiple ways to do things. And I am sure, although I'm not sure I can explain why, that there are times when this might be a preferred structure. I will look up online. I will try to find out somebody arguing why these are superior to simple joins. It may well be, actually, now this is something that we could have trouble testing, but it may well be that this executes more efficiently than the join.
It could also just be an issue, like if you've already done you just cut it.
Yeah, I mean, it could be faster to just put it in. So joins are, although we have a join in here, so I'm not sure we're gaining that much. Yeah, joins can be inefficient, but it is possible that it processes this differently than the join, than a straight join.
Steve, was that just lines 20 through 29 that you ran, or was there something above?
No, it's just lines 20 through 29. The others were the table expressions. Are you not getting it to work? I could take a quick look. Okay. So I'm going to do another one of these for the other. And if you ever take, I don't know if these will ever come up. These are ANSI standard for the most part. That being said, I haven't seen too many of these in non-Microsoft products. Again, probably because you can get there other ways.
Here's an answer on the.
Okay.
It says there are a number of cases where the common table expression can be really useful.
Okay.
One, recursive queries, like walking up a hierarchy tree that is extremely tricky and cumbersome without a CTE. See here for a sample of a recursive CTE. I haven't gone there.
Yeah.
And we haven't gone there yet. So anytime you want to use one of the ranking functions like row number, rank, and title, and so forth. And then it says see here for info on ranking functions.
Right.
In general, any case where you need to select a few rows, columns first based on some criteria, and then do something with these, i.e., for example, update a table, delete duplicates, etc.
Those are more complex. We could try setting one of those up. I don't know.
There's some examples here. There's a link to some examples.
Okay.
I'll send you this link.
Yeah, we could look at it again because it might be worth revisiting to see some of the, like the book doesn't have any of the recursive examples or anything like that.
Yeah, so that sounds like if you're a database administrator, you might want to do some of these functions.
Right. Well, actually, something that's really hard to do is to get rid of duplicate rows.
Yeah, so that's one of the things it says. In general, in case we need to select a few column rows, I'll send you this.
Go ahead.
Why can't you just use distinct?
Well, that'll eliminate them in the result. But I mean, if you actually want to delete them from the database, so you have to discover where the duplicates are, and then remove them. And you know, you could manually. One way is just to order your list, right? And then you'll have your pairs. But it gets to be, you know, if you have a million rows, that's a pretty tedious task. Also, a lot of times you don't know which of the pair is legit.
Right.
Because a lot of times if you're using auto numbers for your keys, there's nothing to keep you from entering the same information twice or 3 times or 4 times. I mean, you need to build in other guards against that. And the keys, you know, if there's children to that, it can get really complicated removing. Good software will help prevent that from happening, but like, you know, the game platform Unity, they have my name in there, must be dozens times because I keep forgetting my password. And rather than try to recover my password, because I often forget what even email account I used, I just create a new account. All right, let's do the other. So this one would be with, and I think we called this service count. So let's say with service count as. And again, the service count here is just a name, arbitrary, for whatever I'm doing. The with and the as are necessary. Open and close a paren, and we'll see that this is fairly standard when we're building objects. We did tables, remember, and it used parens for beginning and end. It drives me nuts because I teach Java and I teach C++, and I've taught and C#. I haven't taught C++ for a while, but C#. And they all have curly braces, and every instinct in my body wants to make those curly braces. But they are not. They are parentheses. I guess, yeah. Well, I think SQL originated and started to develop before even C++. I mean, it was started in the 70s. So it's been around for a long time, and they probably didn't want to change the basics as they built. So I am going to copy again this equation and put it in here, and not equation. My brain is not entirely here today. The query. Now on the outside here, we need to do the select. Okay, so I'm going to take that. Probably shouldn't do that. I should probably just type it. Did I do? I did do select twice. I was wondering if I'd done that twice. All right, so this is from service count. And I still have to do the group by. Request month. And service name. See, and so if I run that, it works just fine, just like before. But the IntelliSense, right? The IntelliSense doesn't recognize service count as an object. I think because it's a temporary object. It's not in its list of tables as an object. So the IntelliSense leaves it all underlined in red. And I know a lot of you get really nervous when you see those underlines. But the IntelliSense in the query, the query, new query screen, is only so good. It's not nearly as good as Visual Studio's. And I think partially it's because of the temporary. There's a lot of temp objects. It doesn't keep up with them. And sometimes even you have to refresh over here before it'll recognize things too. So they've only, when did they start adding it? IntelliSense wasn't in the original versions of the SQL Server here. It's been since like 2010 or so they started, or 2005 maybe? I think it was 2005 that they started adding IntelliSense to this, but it's improved, but it's still not great. So when you have a lot of red underlines, run it. If it works, then IntelliSense is just wrong. So service count is what we're building right now. It's a variable name. So with service count as. So the with, we'll come across the with a lot, especially when we do, and this is another thing that's not in the book, when we do admin SQL, so like creating logins, creating roles, if you're using a query for speed, sometimes you want to force it to use an index. You can, right after the from table name, you can say with and give it the index that you want to force it to use. Because SQL Server will use an index or not use an index based on its algorithms. It can't use an index if it doesn't exist, but it can ignore one that does if it prefers. And generally, they say that the algorithms in SQL Server are better than yours in terms of optimizing things. So we're just building an object, giving a definition of that object, and then querying that object. I think that's why this is preferred. It's just that the structure is clearer than the query in the from clause. It's weird. I'm going to show one. Anyway, you don't have to do with this, but I'm going to declare a variable. So declare, and I'm going to give the variable a name at employee key. It'll be an int to 1. And this is one of the cases where this is going to require a semicolon. All right.
Is that related?
No, it's going to be related to the query below that we haven't written yet. But I just wanted to show you, you can declare a variable. You can have variables. Sometimes these are really useful. There are really complicated queries sometimes where if you try to put it all in one thing, I mean, it's just a nightmare trying to get all the parts together. Sometimes it's easier to do separate queries and store the results in variables, right? And then do your complicated math at the end. This is going to be just a simple variable. When you declare a variable, you use the declare keyword. All variables have an @ sign in SQL. So all variables start with an @ sign. You have to give them a data type. You can initialize it at that point, or if you wanted to initialize it later, you can do set at employee key equal 1. That's equivalent. The two are equivalent. You can't just say at employee key equals 1. You have to do set. You have or select. If you're assigning a value from a query, you use select. If you're just assigning a value, you use set. So we haven't seen variables before, right? So I thought I'd. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do another C common table expression. I'm going to call it with, I called it employee service grants. So basically what I'm going to look for is which grants did an individual employee work on. And basically I'm going to say select month, grant date, and I'm going to call it as request month. Am I doing the right one? Oh, no. Grant date as month. We want this grant key. I guess that's all I want. It's the grant key. Okay, from service grant. Where employee key equals at employee key. So whatever's in the variable. Okay. So, oh, I have a comma where I don't need it. Okay. Now I'm going to select month. Actually, so just select month. Square brackets. Count grant key. I have to give that a name, but what it as total, maybe. From employee service grants. It's weird, it sees it now. And then we have to group by month. Okay, so what we're doing is we're just selecting the month and the grant key from service grants where the employee key is equal to whatever that we put in as a variable. And then we're going to count how many of those grants there were in for each month. So if we run that,
How do we include the?
oh, you know what? Yes, we have to include the variable. So the employee one in the month had 5 of them. If we do a different employee, like I think 3 or 4 had a bunch. Let's do 3. So I'm just changing that to a 3. Am I only getting the month for a reason? It could be that. Let's do 4. Actually, there aren't very many. There aren't very many. I have all of 9. But as you change the variable, it changes the results. Now I'm going to undo the semicolon here, just to show you that it will say this statement is a common table expression. The previous statement must be terminated with a semicolon. This is one of the few places where you have to use a semicolon in SQL Server. You actually don't need one here, but you do need one there. The statement before the table expression has to terminate. And if you were doing this would be the end of that statement if you were to put a semicolon there.
So if we initialize it to 4, we don't need to set statement either.
What? If you initialized it to 4 here, you still would need a semicolon there.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just the statement before this has to be a semicolon. It's weird how none of this stuff here is underlined. See, I said that it's a very inconsistent IntelliSense. Does this make sense, sort of? We're almost done with our time, but the next thing is an important one, but we could do it next time if you want. If you guys want. It's views. Views are much more useful. These could be useful, but it might be a good place. And then next time we can do views and table valued functions and cross applies. Views, by the way, aren't hard, but they're very useful. They're ways of taking the data and putting it together in a way that users can. So a view is basically a view on your database usually with a particular type of user in mind. So you might create they're just stored queries. So you might make a view for human resources based on employee. You might make a view for the customer. You might make a view, you can have lots of different views, and they're just ways of looking at the database, so you don't have to redo the query every time.
So if you just put a 4 in the add employee key,
It would be the same
we get
thing.
the same result. So
But this gives you the variable just so you can see. I mean, it was just an example. You could do a variable. And it's possible that you could do something when we talked about stored procedures. You could have a structure like this inside of a stored procedure where you pass in the parameter to the variable.
or if you use employee key more than once in your query, right? You could go to one place and change it.
Yeah, right. So if you're doing a lot of, it's also just in general with programming, it kind of depends, but it's a good idea to like give just raw numbers where you just enter a number can be kind of difficult because you look at that number and say, what is that number? Where did that come from? What in the heck does that mean? Whereas if you assign it to a variable, you can make it a little clearer what the number's doing. But mostly, I mean, in this case, you're right. You could just put 4 here, down here, skip the variable. In a dynamic context where you could pass in, change the variable dynamically, then it makes more sense to have it as a variable. But I just wanted to show you how to do with variable. Did you send me that link to the?
Yeah, I did it through Canvas.
Okay, because I'd be curious to look at that maybe for next time. Again, if you're all caught up, I guess you could go to an early lunch. In terms of what's turned in, I think like maybe one or two of you are all caught up. Now that doesn't mean you don't have it done and just haven't turned it in. But so we'll finish this on Tuesday. And I'll talk about views. Views will take a little while, and then although they're easy. And table functions are kind of neat. We'll start talking about functions. Okay. You guys seem so enthused. I'll post this part too. And it has been, there's a video. I'm closing this down just because those bulbs keep saying they're dying. They're also blinding. So the first thing I'll do is stop the video.